There are nights when a single sentence can kill 20 years of marriage, a woman betrayed, a cruel toast at a glittering party, and a journey of rebirth that begins, not with vengeance, but with forgiveness. This is the story of Grace Harlow, the woman who learned to walk away in peace and made the whole world fall silent as she did.
Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below.
My name is Grace. I'm 28 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. I once believed that silence was a form of love, that if I could be patient enough, keep my voice soft enough, my smile gentle enough, and my heart forgiving enough, then everything would be peaceful. Ethan would be happy. We would be happy. But now I understand. Sometimes silence is not peace. It's a prison lined with velvet. And that night, under the golden lights of a fancy restaurant in San Francisco, I heard the lock turn. The prison inside me finally opened. The restaurant sat on the corner of Montgomery Street, where the glass walls reflected the city lights like shattered stars. The piano played softly, blending with the loud laughter of people drinking wine, the clinking of glasses. Ethan sat at the head of the table, confident, handsome, and familiar, the way he always made everyone believe he was the perfect man. He was the kind of person who could make a room stop just with his smile. I used to be proud of that. Now it just felt noisy, hollow, and exhausting. I sat beside him, my hand resting on a glass of red wine, the candlelight flickering through its color. I wore the dress he had chosen, elegant, flattering, just enough to make me look worthy of standing next to him. But inside, every breath was heavy. I remember clearly the whisper echoing in my head. Just peace tonight. Just one night without pretending. Ethan told stories and everyone laughed. He talked about his business deals, his parties, his high-profile connections. I smiled at the right moments, nodded when expected. I was too used to being the perfect wife, quiet, graceful, never making anyone uncomfortable. Then he stood up. I knew what was coming. Ethan always liked to end things with a charming joke. He raised his glass, the light glinting across his face, his eyes bright with alcohol and self-satisfaction. "To my wonderful wife, Grace," he said, his smile curving like a velvet-covered blade. "She's the most patient woman I know. God knows how patient she must be to put up with me for 20 years. Laughter erupted, loud, full of wine and smug delight. Someone clapped. A woman joked, "Grace, you're a saint." I smiled. That smile was as light as a petal, but inside me, there was an earthquake. For a second, I felt as though I were standing outside my own body. I saw a woman sitting there, silk dress, gentle smile, distant eyes, and I felt immense pity for her. Because she had spent her whole life protecting everyone else's peace, while her own soul quietly withered. Everything around me seemed to slow down. The laughter faded. The piano warped. In my head there was only one sound, the thudding of my heart, and a chilling clarity. I no longer loved this man, and he had never truly loved me. Ethan sat down, pleased with his performance. I looked at him, his hair now slightly graying, but his eyes still shining with that false pride I once admired. I remembered the nights he came home late saying, "Urgent meeting." The times I saw messages from female colleagues he claimed were misunderstandings, sweetheart. I remembered every apology, every bouquet sent to my office, every fake embrace that smelled of another woman's perfume. And I remembered every time I told myself, every marriage has its rough patches. I just need to be patient a little longer. A little longer. A little longer. Until there was nothing left to hold on to. When the dinner ended, I stood up quietly. Ethan was busy talking, not looking at me. No one asked where I was going. I only heard the sound of my heels tapping softly against the cold tiles, echoing inside me like the sound of a heart breaking. Stepping out of the restaurant, the cold wind hit my face, the scent of salt from the sea slipping through my breath. San Francisco at night was breathtaking. Misty lights, wet streets reflecting the sky like glass, but everything was silent. I stood there, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Then my phone vibrated. A message. My father. "Come home, sweetheart, don't fight for him anymore. Fight for yourself." I stared at those words for a long time. My father, the man who rarely spoke, who once told me that tears were a sign of weakness, had said something that melted me completely. I burst into tears. Not from pain, but because, for the first time in years, I saw myself again in those few simple words. I called a taxi. When the driver asked, "Where to, ma'am?" I said, "Just drive. I'll know when to stop." The car rolled forward, the city fading behind me. Skyscrapers turned into long trails of light. In the rearview mirror, I saw my eyes, puffy, red, but alive. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I stopped at a small hotel near the harbor. A single room, the scent of clean linens, warm yellow light. I sat on the bed, took off my high heels, rubbed my sore feet. A wave of relief spread through me, as if every chain around my heart was falling away. I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back. Not perfect, not young, but real. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed to face her. I opened my phone, reread my father's message, then turned it off. The room fell into silence. Outside, the waves lapped gently against the shore. I lay down and listened to my heartbeat. Slow, steady, certain. And I understood. Peace is not silence. Peace is the absence of fear. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky was pale with mist. I packed my things. Just a few clothes, an old journal, my mother's necklace, and my wedding ring, which I took off and left on the table. No anger, no regret, only the quiet knowing that it was time to set the past free. I stepped out of the hotel, pulling my suitcase through the thin fog. I didn't look back once. Behind me was noisy San Francisco. Ahead was a road I had never dared to take. The air was cold, but inside me, for the first time in 20 years, a small flame began to rise. Not the fire of vengeance, but the fire of a woman learning to live again. Last night, his toast made everyone laugh. But to me, it was the last toast he would ever give to a wife who had stayed silent. Because that night, my silence died, and with it, a new grace was born. I left San Francisco in silence, but my mind was loud, as if the whole city were exploding inside my head. The sound of the wheels rolling along the night road reminded me of all the years that had passed. Every step I had taken beside Ethan, every word, every glance, every silence I had chosen. It turned out he wasn't the first one to betray me. It was me. I was the one who betrayed myself. The car drove past familiar streets, where he and I used to walk hand in hand when we were young. Back then, Ethan was the man every girl dreamed of. Tall, confident, with a bright smile and eyes that knew how to make people trust him. He had that ability to make a whole room turn toward him with just a look. I once believed that was the aura of a successful man. Now I know it was just his way of hiding the emptiness inside. We met at a business seminar. I was a young administrative assistant. He was the guest speaker. After the talk, he walked up to me, shook my hand, and said, "You have the kind of eyes that make people want to linger a little longer." I blushed, smiled shyly, and in that moment, a part of me believed I was special. Ethan was good at making people believe what they wanted to believe. He made me believe I was valuable, that as long as I was with him, I would never lose my way. In the early years of our marriage, I was truly happy. We lived in a small seaside apartment, eating cold pizza and laughing because we had nothing but love. Ethan often said, "One day we'll have everything, Grace. But the most precious thing I have is you." I believed him, so deeply that I didn't realize that promise was the first brick in the golden cage he was building around me. When he began to succeed, we moved into a larger, more luxurious home. White walls, tall windows overlooking the city. Everyone admired us. The perfect couple. The model marriage. I became the woman who always smiled at parties, who stood gracefully behind her husband while he gave speeches. Behind those smiles were long nights. Me sitting on the sofa, listening to the door open past midnight, and his quiet words. The meeting ran late. I had smelled strange perfume on his collar. Seen the messages. "Thank you for tonight. You're still amazing as ever." I'd held the phone, ready to ask, then put it down. Not because I believed him, but because I was afraid of losing him. Once, I told my mother, "I think Ethan's seeing someone." She placed a hand on my shoulder and sighed. "Men sometimes need to feel admired, Grace. As long as you can keep your family together, don't let small things ruin your life." Small things? I wanted to ask. But I didn't dare. So I learned to swallow my tears. I learned to use makeup to hide the swollen eyes. I learned to smile while my heart was breaking. The price of glamour began there. Each time I stayed silent, I lost a piece of myself. Each time I smiled, I told another lie. I became the protector of his image and of our marriage, while no one protected me. Ethan always knew how to make me feel guilty. When I asked, "Where were you so late?" he would just smile softly, touch my shoulder. "You're overthinking again, Grace. I'm working for our future." I lowered my head, apologized. I didn't want to be that kind of wife. The nagging one. I wanted to be the understanding wife, the composed one, the one who knew her place. And in that understanding, I slowly disappeared. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and looked beside me. The bed was empty. The glow of a phone lit the ceiling. A message appeared. "I miss you." I don't know when I sat up. I only remember the cold shiver running down my spine, but I still did nothing. I just opened the window, letting the wind rush in and blow apart the false calm that filled the room. That was when I understood. Glamour never comes free, and I had paid for it with my soul. By the 10th year, I stopped trying. No more arguments, no more questions. I let him live in his world, the world that admired him, while I became part of the background. I remember once, my friend Patricia, a sharp and brilliant lawyer, asked me, "Grace, are you happy?" I smiled and said, "What is happiness, really?" She looked at me for a long time, then said, "It's when you don't have to pretend anymore." That sentence haunted me for years, like a scar that never healed. I used to think I was strong, but in truth, I was only good at enduring. I accepted betrayal in exchange for society's admiration. I accepted loneliness in exchange for the title, Ethan's wife. I sacrificed myself in exchange for a fragile illusion of peace. One day, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. My face was the same, but my eyes were different. No longer bright, just tired. I realized that if I kept living like this, I would slowly die, and no one would even notice. I remembered that night at the dinner, the toast, the laughter, the cold eyes. Everything crashed down on me like a wave. But in that very moment, I also knew I could never go back. I didn't leave that restaurant out of anger. I left because I had finally seen the truth. The next morning, I woke up early. The first light of day shone through the white curtains. I made a cup of coffee and sat by the hotel window. The coffee was bitter, but real. I remembered all the times I had brewed coffee for him, waiting for him to come home, and how it always went cold before he walked through the door. Today, this cup was for me, and it was warm. I opened my old journal, the one I used to hide in a drawer. On the last page, I wrote, "I understand the loneliness of a 20-year marriage. I understand pretending to be happy when your heart is already dead. But I also understand that if I don't walk away, I will never live again." When I finished writing, I put down the pen. For the first time in years, my hands didn't tremble. I picked up my phone and found Patricia's number. Her voice came through after 2 rings, steady as always. "Grace?" I took a deep breath. "I need to see you, Patricia. I don't want to stay silent anymore." There was a short pause, then she said softly, "All right, let's start over, Grace." I smiled faintly. Outside, sunlight poured into the room, touching my cheeks, warm and honest in a way that felt strange. I knew I had just done the bravest thing I'd done in 20 years. And as I closed my eyes, one clear thought echoed in my mind. I don't need to fight to keep a love that's already dead. I only need to learn how to love the woman I'm becoming. That morning, I went back to the old house. The air was misty, sunlight thin as silk spilling across the familiar road I had walked 1,000 times. Yet now it felt distant, painfully strange. The rows of trees lining the street looked older, as if they too had witnessed me returning too many times, not out of love, but out of fear. Today, I was coming back not because I was afraid. I was coming back to end it. The car stopped before the glossy black iron gate. The small nameplate on the wall still read the Harlows, his last name, not mine. I once felt proud to have it engraved there, as proof that I had been chosen. Now I saw it only as a mark of ownership, a scar of control. I sat in the car for a long while, staring at that gate. Part of me wanted to drive away. Another part, deeper and stronger, said, "No, face it." I opened the car door. The hinge creaked. A dry, sharp sound, like the groan of the past being awakened. The air around the house smelled of roses mixed with rust. Each step on the stone path stirred a memory. His laughter, the parties, the times I stood watching him shine in a crowd while I faded into the background. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The house was thick with his cologne. That dark oak scent I once loved, now giving me a headache. I took off my shoes, walked barefoot across the cold wooden floor. The place was unnervingly clean, as if no one had lived there. Or perhaps, as if love itself had never lived there. The living room was unchanged. Cream-colored sofa, glass coffee table, and the wedding portrait in the center. Me in a white dress, smiling, my head resting on his shoulder. The photo my friends always called a fairy tale. I stepped closer, staring for a long time. The woman in the picture was beautiful, but she wasn't me anymore. She was a role I had played for 20 years, gentle, modest, always knowing her place. I took the frame down and set it on the table. The soft clink of metal against glass echoed like thunder inside me. The bedroom looked the same, sheets smooth, pillows straight, everything perfect, except for a soul. I opened the closet. The clothes were still arranged by color: beige, brown, white, gray. Safe, silent tones. I touched each dress, each gown he once picked for me. He liked me to be elegant, calm, just enough to be admired, but never enough to outshine him. And I had obeyed. I had made myself smaller so he could shine brighter. A sharp ache rose in my chest. Not pain, tenderness. Pity for the woman I once was, who never learned how to protect her own soul. Then I heard laughter from the garden. A man's voice, mixed with a woman's. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. Ethan was standing among the rose bushes, the garden I had planted, trimmed, tended for years. He was smiling, the sunlight glinting off the wine glass in his hand. He looked happy. And I felt light. No more hate, no more love, just a woman witnessing the end of an old dream, smiling because she was still standing. I turned back to the bedroom and opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside was a small velvet box. I knew exactly what it held. The wedding ring? Simple, not expensive, but once the center of my universe. When he slipped it onto my finger, I believed everything began there. Now I knew. Everything ended there too. I closed my fingers around the ring and walked out to the garden. The wind was soft, the air filled with the faint scent of roses. The flowers were in full bloom, beautiful to the point of cruelty. I knelt beside one, touching its open petals. A thorn nicked my finger, drawing a small bead of blood. I let out a quiet laugh. So you can still feel pain after all. I looked up at the sky, then through the ring. A small streak of silver glimmered in the sunlight before disappearing among the leaves. I didn't hear it land, but inside me, I heard it clearly. The soft click of a door opening. I stood, wiped the blood away with an old handkerchief. The feeling was strange, as if someone had lifted a heavy stone from my chest. Nothing bound me anymore. Nothing frightened me. I didn't need to hold on to things that only made me wither. I walked around the garden one last time. The rose bushes I had planted were overgrown, tangled, just like the woman I had been, always trying to hide pain behind a polished appearance. I touched a petal and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a place to hide, but now I have to go." Back inside, I gathered a few things, a few clothes, a journal, my mother's necklace. The only thing that reminded me who I once was. Everything else I left behind. Each object was a fragment of memory, but I no longer wanted to carry the past. Before leaving, I paused before the wedding photo. I opened the frame and took out the picture. The bride, the woman I was 20 years ago, was smiling brightly. I looked at her for a long time. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. She had loved deeply, even when it was wrong. She had endured, even when it hurt. She deserved forgiveness. I whispered, "Thank you for trying so hard, but now you can rest." I tore the photo in half, folded it, and placed it in the drawer. No anger, no bitterness, only a quiet goodbye. When I stepped into the hallway, sunlight poured in, flooding everything with gold. I stopped, took a deep breath, then closed the door. This time I wasn't leaving out of fear. I was leaving by choice. Outside, Ethan was still laughing, unaware that I had come, had gone, and no longer belonged to this place. I walked through the gate without looking back. The iron gate swung shut behind me with a deep metallic clang, the sound of a final period. I got into the car. The radio played an old piano tune, the one we used to dance to in the living room. Back then, I thought it was romantic. Now, it was just sad. But that was all right. I turned the volume up. I wanted to remember the sound, so that someday, when I heard it again, I could smile without pain. The car rolled down the small hill, and I lowered the window to let the wind rush in. It whipped through my hair, salty, cold. But I felt more alive than ever. Behind me, the city receded. The house, the garden, the photograph, the laughter, all shrank, faded and dissolved. I realized something then. Freedom has no sound. It is simply the moment you stop finding reasons to stay. As the car crossed the bridge, I saw the blue sky reflected on the water below. On the other side was the road leading to my parents' home, where there was the smell of hot soup, the creak of an old chair, and the embrace I had forgotten long ago. I whispered, Dad, you were right. I'm home. For the first time in many years, I smiled, not for anyone else, but for myself. I drove out of San Francisco while the sun still blazed like fire on the high rises. The road stretched toward the outskirts, lined on both sides with trees that had shed their leaves early. Sunlight glanced off the mirror, blurring like memories. Every bridge, every bend made me think of a piece of life I had left behind. That city had once been my stage, where I played the role of the perfect wife, the strong woman, the one who had it all. But when the curtain fell, all that remained was the hollow echo inside my chest. The farther I went, the calmer my heartbeat became. Wind slipped through the cracked window, carrying the smell of damp earth, of wild grass after the rain. The chill of the countryside brushed my skin and made me shiver, not from cold, but from how honest it was. It had been a long time since everything around me felt this real. When the sign, Maple Creek, 2 miles, appeared, my heart tightened. Home. My parents' house sits at the end of a dirt road, between 2 rows of old oaks. The roof tiles are faded, the white walls flaking here and there. But even from afar, I could see the thin blue smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. The sign of life, of a meal waiting, of a home that's real. I stopped the car at the gate. No need to ring the bell. My mother had already opened the door, as if she knew I would come. Grace. Her voice trembled, catching in her throat. I couldn't say anything. I just stepped forward. When her arms wrapped around me, I heard my own heartbeat. No longer heavy, only warm. The smell of her clothes, cheap soap and baked apple pie, made me cry. Not loud sobs, but the quiet tears of someone who has just found warmth that had been lost for too long. I'm home, I whispered. Inside, the house was just as before. The old clock on the wall still went tick, tock, steadily. The floral curtain was worn, but the breeze still made it sway. The smell of my mother's stew filled the kitchen, blending with the scent of damp wood and the dried oranges hanging over the hearth. I sat on the old, scuffed sofa, the one that still held the imprint of my father's seat from his evenings reading the paper. The backrest sagged a little, the cushions had lost their spring, but when I leaned into it, I felt held. My father stepped out from his study, slow but steady in his gait. His old police uniform still hung behind the door, like a part of him that had never left. He looked at me without speaking. His eyes, deep, calm, a touch stern, made my own fill with tears. "Back, are you?" he said, his voice hoarse. I nodded. He didn't ask why. He just came over and put a hand on my shoulder. A gentle squeeze, firm and warm. That gesture said everything. I understood that to him, love didn't need many words. It only needed presence. We ate dinner together, the first meal in many years that truly tasted good. My mother's stew, bright green, boiled vegetables, a steaming bowl of soup. I ate slowly, listening to the spoon tap the bowl, listening to my mother's questions, my father's occasional dry cough. Everything was so ordinary. And it was that very ordinariness that made me feel alive again. After dinner, my father went out to the porch to tend his bonsai. I followed him. A thin mist lay over the sky, and in the distance, crickets chirped. My mother brewed 2 cups of ginger tea and set them on the wooden table. We sat side by side, in silence, only the rustle of leaves. Then my father spoke. "The miracle of forgiveness isn't for Ethan, you know." I looked up at him, my heart hitching. He still didn't look at me. He kept his focus on trimming the tiny branches in his hand. "It's for you." I stayed quiet and listened as he went on. Forgiveness doesn't mean saying, "He was right." It means saying, "I'm strong enough to let go." When you forgive, you cut the rope that ties you to that person. You think you're setting them free, but in truth, you're saving yourself. I looked at his hands, the hands that once held a gun, that kept order on so many streets, now gently cradling a small pot of green. Softly, I asked, "But what if I can't forget?" He smiled, his eyes still following each careful snip. "No one asks you to forget. Forgiveness isn't erasing memory. It's looking at the wound without letting it rule you anymore. Forgetting is temporary, but forgiveness is forever." I swallowed my tears. His words weren't loud, but they sank deep, like water soaking into parched earth. I looked up at the sky, dusk purple draped over the roof, and I suddenly realized peace isn't far away at all. It's here in this quiet, between the sound of boiling tea, the warmth of ginger, and my father's low voice. My mother came out and wrapped a wool blanket around me. "You've gotten so thin," she said, worry in her voice. "But it's all right. Now that you're here, you'll get better." I leaned my head on her shoulder. Her hair smelled faintly of sun and wind. I whispered, "I thought I'd lost everything, Mom." She stroked my hair, speaking slowly. "No, you haven't lost anything. You only left yourself behind." I cried. This time I didn't try to hide it. Tears fell onto her hand, soaking into her wrinkled skin as if blending into the lines of her years. She said nothing more, just held my hand tight, as though afraid I might drift away from this place again. Night fell. My parents went to their room. I stayed on the porch, watching the yellow porch light flicker in the breeze. The old house was quiet, but not lonely. I listened to the insects, the clock inside, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. And for the first time in many years, I felt safe. I went back to my old room. Everything was still there. The small bookshelf, the framed photo of me at 17, the messy words scrawled on the wall. "Follow your dreams, Grace." I smiled, a very genuine smile. Before sleeping, I opened my journal and wrote, "Today, I sat with my father and listened to him speak about forgiveness. I don't think I'm ready, but perhaps I've already begun. Forgiveness isn't because Ethan deserves it. It's because I deserve peace. Maybe the miracle isn't about who's wrong or right, but about whether we're brave enough to let go." I put down the pen and lay back on the bed. Moonlight fell across the curtain, soft as breath. In a light, drifting dream, I found myself walking through a garden of lavender. No mocking laughter, no judging eyes. Only wind, the scent of flowers, and the feeling of returning to myself. Tomorrow morning, I'll make coffee for Dad and help Mom water the garden. I don't know where the future will lead, but at least I have a starting point. A small house, 2 aging parents, and a heart mending after the storm. Mornings in Maple Creek always carry a special kind of calm, a light that is both gentle and cool, soft enough to let you hear the wind moving through the trees. I sat at the old dining table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the window. My mother was watering the plants on the porch. My father was fixing a creaky wooden chair. The tapping of his hammer mingled with the scent of roasted coffee and wet grass. Simple, honest, and peaceful in a way that still felt unfamiliar. After years of living among loud parties, bright lights, and false smiles, I had forgotten what it felt like to be surrounded by silence that wasn't frightening. Here, silence was kind. It didn't imprison. It healed. I began to feel as though I was being washed clean. Each layer of makeup, each mask I had worn slowly falling away. I read books, wrote in my journal again, walked around the small lake behind the house. Some afternoons, I just sat by the water, watching the sun fade, listening to birds call each other until their voices disappeared. Those small things, to me, were miracles. But peace never exists without stirring the past. One morning, my phone rang. A strange number appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. A deep, slightly hoarse male voice came through. Grace. It's me, Alex Rivera. I froze. That name pulled me back into memories I'd rather not revisit. Alex, once Ethan's trusted assistant, the man who had sent me the documents that revealed my husband's true face. But he was also the one who disappeared right after everything collapsed, leaving me alone in the wreckage. His voice trembled as he spoke slowly. I'm not calling to talk about Ethan or the company. I just want to apologize. I stayed silent. The word apologize felt distant and painful at the same time. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. I knew what he was doing. To you. To the business. But I was afraid. I was afraid of losing everything, so I let you suffer alone. Then, when it all fell apart, I lost everything anyway. My job, my reputation, my family. All I had left was regret. His voice cracked. I could hear the sigh, the clatter of a spoon against a porcelain cup, faint cafe noise in the background. Grace, he said softly, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I understand how much it must have hurt. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the window. Sunlight spilled over everything, pale and hazy like mist. And I realized I wasn't angry at Alex. Not anymore. In fact, deep down, I felt compassion for him. Because in our shared wreckage, we were both victims of the same people, Ethan and ourselves. I'm not angry with you, I said quietly. Really? Really? I think I was angrier at myself for staying too long in a story I knew was wrong. Silence filled the line. Then a rough laugh came, not mocking, but relieved. You've changed, Grace. I have? I smiled faintly. Your voice. It sounds peaceful now. Not sharp like the last time we spoke. I said nothing. A warmth spread through me. Not love, not pity. Just a rare understanding between two broken souls. Alex told me that after Ethan's scandal erupted, he was caught up in the investigation. His wife left him. His daughter wouldn't speak to him. He moved to Santa Cruz and became a barista in a small cafe. Every morning I wake up before the sun, he said, and brew the first cup of coffee for myself. It's the only time I feel like life still has meaning. I didn't reply, but a quiet respect rose in me. Because I understood. People who've lost everything learn to treasure even the smallest things. Before hanging up, Alex said, Grace, you can hate Ethan all you want, but don't let him take away your kindness. I lost mine, and it took me years to find it again. You're different. Don't lose what's best in you. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. I opened the window and let the wind rush in. Light rain had begun to fall, carrying the scent of wet earth mixed with the old wood of the house. In that quiet moment, I realized something. Anger had once been the fire that kept me alive, but now I didn't need it anymore. That afternoon, I picked up my phone and called Patricia, my old friend and the lawyer who'd helped me through the chaos. Grace, are you all right? She asked, her voice gentle yet steady as always. I think I'm ready. Ready for what? Divorce. There was a pause. Then Patricia spoke slowly. Do you want to win everything back, or do you want peace? I looked out the window where my mother was airing blankets under the sun. I want this silence to end. Patricia laughed softly, a rare, warm sound. Then you've made the right choice, Grace. Justice isn't always victory. Sometimes, justice is the permission to start over. We arranged to meet at her office the following week. When I hung up, I felt strangely light, as if I'd finally set down a suitcase I'd been carrying too long. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, Today, someone who once hurt me helped me remember the value of compassion. I used to think forgiveness meant surrender, but now I understand. It's the only strength that lets us keep moving without becoming what we once despised. I closed the journal and looked up at the ceiling. Crickets sang outside. The scent of lemon blossoms drifted in through the window. In the dark, I smiled. A small, genuine smile. The next morning, Patricia called to confirm our meeting. Her voice was soft, like the morning sun. "Grace, I'm proud of you." I answered. "Don't be too proud yet. I'm still scared." "That's good," she said. "Only the brave know how to be afraid." I laughed. The fear inside me no longer made me shrink. It reminded me I was alive. By noon, the rain returned. My mother made pumpkin soup. My father turned on his old radio. I sat by the window listening to the rain tapping on the roof. Steady, gentle, like a heartbeat returning to normal after a long panic. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but at least today, I no longer felt like a victim. My phone buzzed. An email from Alex Rivera. "I've started working at a job center helping the unemployed. Maybe we're both trying to rebuild what's left of our lives. Thank you, Grace. You reminded me that compassion is never weakness." I finished reading and smiled softly. The rain was still falling, but inside me, it had stopped. I placed my hand over my heart, feeling my breath, deep, slow, real. And in that moment, I understood. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering, without trembling. The day I returned to San Francisco, the sky was draped in a thick veil of fog, like memories that hadn't yet lifted. I had never thought I would come back to this city, a place that had once symbolized a dream, now just a familiar, yet distant scene, like a photograph washed of color. I stepped out of the car and looked around. The buildings still stood tall, but they no longer seemed to tower over me. Maybe it wasn't the city that had changed. Maybe it was me. Patricia was waiting for me on the courthouse steps. A light wind swept her short hair across her face. She smiled, her eyes both strong and warm. "Are you ready?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, even if my heart's still trembling a little." "Trembling is good," she said softly. "It reminds us we can still feel." Inside the courthouse, the white light was harsh, exposing every detail. The smell of floor cleaner, old paper, and cold coffee in a clerk's hand mingled together, making the air feel both chilly and tired. I sat on the right-hand bench, facing Ethan. He looked the same. Or perhaps not. The familiar face was worn, his eyes sunken. The expensive suit seemed not to fit anymore. In that moment, I saw not only the man who had betrayed me, but a depleted soul sitting there, trying to preserve the last residue of power. The judge entered. The hearing began. I heard the rustle of pages, the scratch of pens, the dry recitations of the lawyers. Everything moved past like a dream I wasn't part of, even though I was the lead character who'd forgotten her lines. When it was my turn, I said only, "Yes, I agree to the terms." My voice rang clear, strangely calm. I wasn't seeking justice. I was seeking an exit. Ethan looked at me. That gaze made my heart tighten, not with love, but with pity. I no longer saw an enemy. I saw a man who had lost everything, including himself. And in that instant I realized I had already gone much farther than he had. When the judge declared, "The marriage between Grace Harlow and Ethan Harlow is hereby dissolved," the entire room fell silent. No one applauded. No one spoke. Only the small clatter of a pen dropping onto the table. A quiet sound that echoed like a final period. Patricia touched my hand lightly. "It's done." Two simple words that made me want to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. I stood and looked around the room. Gray walls, cold wooden benches, a high, indifferent ceiling. Everything seemed to drift, blur, then vanish. I don't remember how I walked out. I only know that when the courthouse door closed behind me, a long chapter in my life closed with it. Ethan approached. He stopped a few meters away, unable to come closer. "Grace," he called. His voice was hoarse, trembling. I turned back. He looked at me with red, exhausted eyes. I'm sorry." 3 words. Once I had ached to hear them 1,000 times on lonely nights. But now, they arrived too, late, like a blossom shaken from its stem before it could open. I looked at him for a long moment, then said, "I forgive you, Ethan. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." He lowered his head and said nothing. I turned away. No one called after me. No footsteps followed. Only a soft wind passed, as if the universe itself exhaled. Outside, the sun was breaking through. Thin beams slid between the clouds and spilled onto the rain-slick sidewalk. I drew a deep breath and caught the scent of wet grass, car exhaust, and coffee from a nearby shop. Together, they formed the smell of freedom. Patricia stood beside me, silent for a moment, then asked, "You're not going to cry?" I shook my head. "No, I've cried enough." She smiled. "You did it, Grace." I answered, "No, not really. I didn't do anything. I just stopped." We parted at the corner. I walked along the sidewalk, hearing my shoes tap the damp ground. My steps felt lighter than ever. The city was still noisy, but inside me everything was still as a lake. I ducked into a small cafe near the shore. The smell of freshly roasted coffee was rich, threaded with vanilla and old jazz on the speakers. I chose a table by the window, ordered a cappuccino, and opened my notebook. I wrote, "I used to think freedom would be the moment he knelt to apologize, but today I realized freedom is when I no longer need to hear it." When I put down the pen, I caught my reflection in the window. A familiar face with different eyes. No more fear, no more expectation. Just me, whole, even with a few cracks. In the afternoon, I drove to the ocean. The road traced the damp sand, the wind gusting hard enough to tangle my hair. I stopped atop a rise where the horizon spread into endless water. The sea was fierce that day, white-capped waves crashing against rock. But beneath the roar, I heard my heartbeat. Steady, resilient. I took off my shoes and stepped onto the sand. The cool grains brushed my skin and the wind made me shiver. I looked out to where sky met sea and whispered, "I'm here, Ethan, but not as the woman you used to know." I picked up a stone and hurled it far. It struck the surface and sent ripples widening outward. I thought of the last 20 years. Every wound, every held-back word, every forced smile, all of it like those rings spreading, thinning and dissolving into the larger sea. As the sun slipped behind the horizon, I sat and listened to the ocean breathe. Something in me loosened. Not love, not hatred. Something lighter, thinner, perhaps fear. My phone buzzed. A message from Alex Rivera. "Grace, I'm looking at the Santa Cruz Ocean. I thought of you. I hope you found the peace you deserve." I smiled and tapped back. "I have, Alex. It wasn't anywhere else but inside me." I slipped the phone into my pocket and drew a deep breath. The brine of the sea mingled with the scent of wet sand, soaking into every cell. A wave reached my feet, cold but kind. I closed my eyes. Behind my lids, everything returned. The wedding, the tears, the empty nights, my father's smile, my mother's embrace, Patricia's voice, and the ocean before me. All of it formed a single scene, no longer at odds, no longer in conflict, just a complete picture of my life, its light and dark tones blending together. When I opened my eyes, the sun had set. On the sky's canvas, the last strip of light faded, leaving a deep blue space. I stood, dusted the sand from my dress, and walked back to the car. Before starting the engine, I looked into the rearview mirror, saw myself, my gaze calm as water. No longer Ethan's Grace, only Grace, the woman who has learned to forgive the world and herself. It's been exactly 1 year since I left San Francisco. A year, not too long, yet long enough for me to look back on everything I once thought would last forever. My old life feels like shattered glass. It once reflected dazzling illusions, but behind them were only sharp edges that cut me every time I tried to hold on. I've decided not to pick up the pieces anymore. Now, I live in a small house on a hillside in Maple Creek, a quiet town about 2 hours from the city. I named it the Little House of Light. It has only 2 rooms, a wooden porch, and a small garden behind it. But every morning when sunlight seeps through the window and touches the old wooden table, I feel the peace I spent years searching for in the wrong places. No longer am I woken by the buzz of my phone or the pressure of meetings. I wake to the sound of birds fluttering against the roof, the smell of fresh coffee, and the cool mist still clinging to the window frame. No one expects me to be perfect anymore. No one waits for me to play the part of the strong wife, the woman who has it all. Now I am simply Grace, learning to live slowly, to breathe deeply, and to listen to myself. I begin each day in the garden. When I first moved in, the soil behind the house was dry, tangled with weeds, almost lifeless. But I wasn't discouraged. I rolled up my sleeves, turned the earth, mixed the soil, and planted lavender, roses, wild daisies. My hands tanned, my fingertips cracked, but in every small ache, I found a strange kind of joy. My mother often visits. She laughs when she sees me working under the sun. The daughter I remember wouldn't step out of an air-conditioned office, afraid of wind, sun, even dirt. Now you're digging soil with your bare hands? I looked down at my muddy fingers and smiled. I think, Mom, when I touch the earth, I'm touching myself. She nodded, said nothing more, only laid her hand gently on my shoulder, a touch soft enough to tell me she was proud. The garden has taught me so much. I learned that flowers don't bloom because someone wants them to. They bloom because they have enough time, enough light, enough stillness. And perhaps people are the same. I once tried to bloom in the middle of storms, and all it did was make me wither. Now I let myself grow quietly, unseen, unpraised, but real. At noon, I work in a small room that overlooks the garden. I'm collaborating with Alex Rivera, the man who once taught me that compassion isn't weakness. We met again at a small seminar in Santa Cruz a few months ago. He's different now, quieter, but with eyes deeper and clearer. He told me he started a small foundation to help people who've suffered loss or betrayal rebuild their faith in life. Grace, he said, I believe that those who've been broken, once they learn to rise again, know best how to lift others up. I agreed to join him without hesitation, not for him, but because I too wanted to turn my scars into something meaningful. We work in a small office. White walls, wooden desks, soft light. In the mornings, the sound of typing mingles with gentle laughter and the scent of coffee. I meet many women who remind me of who I was a year ago. They cry, they're angry, they're afraid. They don't believe they can ever love themselves again. I don't tell them to be strong. I simply sit beside them, quietly. Because I know, sometimes presence itself is the language of compassion. One afternoon, a young woman asked me, Grace, don't you hate your ex-husband? I don't understand how you could forgive him. I looked at her and answered softly, because I don't want to carry him into the rest of my life. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's how we set ourselves free. She went silent. Tears filled her eyes, and in her, I saw myself. the woman who once mistook kindness for weakness. At night, when I come home, I brew tea, turn on a warm lamp, and play soft jazz. The golden light glows against the cream-colored wall. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I just listen to the rain tapping on the tin roof. I once feared silence, because it forced me to hear myself. Now I love it, because only in silence do I hear my own heartbeat clearly. Happiness, to me now, isn't someone holding my hand. It's being able to sit alone without feeling lonely. I no longer need anyone to affirm my worth. I know I am enough. One day, while cleaning the closet, I found a small box. Inside were old photographs, a yellowed wedding card, and a handkerchief embroidered with my name, Grace Harlow. I held it for a long time, as if holding another life. I took the box to the garden, among the lavender now in full bloom. I dug a small hole, placed the box inside, covered it with soil, and set a white stone on top. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything you taught me." No tears, no resentment, just a sweet stillness, the kind that comes when you finally know you've grown up. That night I dreamed I was standing in a field of lavender. The sky was full of stars. With each step I took, the flowers bloomed behind me. My father was smiling, my mother waving, and my own voice drifted through the wind. I'm home. I woke before dawn. Moonlight still lingered on the curtain, and a cool breeze slipped through the crack. Outside, the lavender glistened with dew, silver under the fading night. I whispered, "You made it, Grace." In the morning, I brewed coffee, set a bunch of dried lavender on the table, and threw open the windows. Light flooded the room, warm and golden, like honey. I looked around, the simple space alive with breath, every object, every corner holding a piece of me. I sat down, opened my journal, and wrote the final line of the year. A year ago, I left to find peace. Today, I don't have to search anymore, because it's already within me. I lifted my head, watching the sky where a flock of sparrows crossed. Smiling, I whispered, "Thank you, life, for not giving me what I wanted, so I could learn to cherish what I needed." I closed the journal and took a deep breath. In the scent of lavender filling the room, I knew I had truly come home. Not to the world, but to myself. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. A thin ray of sunlight slipped through the white curtains and rested on my hand, still holding a steaming cup of coffee. Outside, the breeze moved gently, and the scent of lavender from the small garden drifted through the house. I inhaled deeply, feeling the stillness spread through every vein. Today, I was returning to San Francisco, the city I'd left a year ago with a shattered heart. But this time was different. I wasn't going back to prove anything, or to confront anyone. I was going back to share. I'd been invited to speak at the Women in Business conference under the theme, Compassion and Inner Strength. When Patricia called, I hesitated. A part of me still feared the lights, the looks, the possibility of being dragged back into the place that once drained me. But Patricia's voice, soft and steady like that of an older sister, said, "Grace, you don't need to speak to be admired. You just need to speak as yourself. Somewhere out there, someone is waiting to hear that she isn't alone." I was silent for a long time before agreeing, not for the applause, not for the audience, but because I knew if there was even one woman in that room holding her breath in quiet pain as I once did, she needed to hear that silence can also be the beginning of strength. The road back to San Francisco felt both familiar and strange. The sky was blue. The glass buildings caught the sunlight. The ocean still shimmered in the distance. I sat in the car, watching the city come into view through the rearview mirror. Once a battlefield, now just the backdrop of a new chapter. The conference hall stood in the heart of downtown, Bright glass doors, portraits of accomplished women lining the corridors. I paused before a tall mirror in the lobby. The woman looking back wasn't the Grace of a year ago. White blouse, olive green skirt, hair loose over her shoulders, calm eyes. I smiled. I used to be afraid to look at myself. Not anymore. Backstage was a blur of sound, heels clicking, microphones testing, perfume and the smell of freshly printed paper. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady and calm. Years ago, before walking on stage, I would whisper to myself, "Be perfect." Today, I whispered, "Be real." The host introduced me in a formal tone. As I stepped into the light, the brightness hit my face. Not blinding, but warm. Applause rose softly, rhythmically, like waves. I looked down and saw hundreds of women of every age gazing up at me with quiet anticipation. I could feel their energy, hearts that had once broken, searching for hope again. I began slowly. My name is Grace Harlow, and once I believed I had everything. The whispers faded. The room went still. I spoke. Without embellishment, without armor. I told them about my 20-year marriage that looked perfect from the outside, about the elegant dinners, the flash of cameras, and the cold nights I spent alone, beside a man I no longer recognized. I told them about that night, the toast, the wine, the laughter, and the way I walked away in silence. I didn't leave because I hated him, I said. I left because I didn't want to keep hating myself. Someone in the crowd lowered her head. Someone else wiped away tears. I felt my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but because I was alive again. Each story I spoke set down a weight I'd been carrying for too long. I told them about my father, who once said, "The miracle of forgiveness isn't for the one who hurt you, but for you, so you can be free." I told them about my mother, who never asked why I left, only held me as if I had never done anything wrong. I told them about Alex Rivera, a man who once lost his conscience, but found it again. And then I told them about myself, a woman who fell and learned to stand up not for revenge, but to live the life she chose. Looking out at the audience, I saw faces lifted toward me, not in admiration, but in understanding. And I knew, in that instant, that all of us were healing together. I paused, then closed with a line from my journal, written in my small house in Maple Creek. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It doesn't change the past, but it lets you live fully in the present. When I bowed, the room rose with me. Applause filled the air, not loud, but deep and warm. A young woman came up to shake my hand, her eyes red. "Thank you, Grace. I used to think silence was weakness, but now I understand. It can be courage." I held her hand and smiled. "You're right. Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you're strong enough not to shout." By afternoon, the sunlight had turned gold on the pavement. I didn't drive straight home. I stopped by a small cafe by the sea, its blue-painted walls misted with condensation on the windows. I ordered a cup of honey lemon tea and sat by the glass, watching the silver waves in the distance. On the table lay a bouquet of lavender, a gift from an older woman at the conference. Next to it was a small card that read, "Thank you for teaching us that kindness isn't weakness, it's just quieter than power." I read the words, looked up at the ocean. The sun was sinking, gold melting across the water. I opened my notebook and wrote, "There are battles we win without fighting, because true strength is choosing peace over being right." I put the pen down and smiled. A year ago, I'd sat in a place like this, to cry. Today, I sat here simply to breathe, and to feel alive. Outside, the breeze carried salt and lavender through the air. I stood, left money on the table, took the bouquet, and stepped out. The sky was turning violet. I walked along the shore, my shoes sinking into the sand, the water brushing gently against my feet. With each step, I heard my heart whisper, "You're enough, Grace. You don't have to be stronger. Just be true." I stopped and looked at the vast sea. The wind ran through my hair and my eyes stung slightly. I closed them, letting the breeze carry away what still lingered: anger, pain, fear, leaving only one thing behind: peace. When I opened my eyes, the sky was full of stars. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you for not breaking. Thank you for staying gentle." And there, on the moonlit sand, I knew. This wasn't just a moment of renewal. It was proof that forgiving yourself is the deepest form of human strength. That afternoon, the sky over Maple Creek carried a soft gray hue. A thin drizzle that had lingered since morning still floated through the air, veiling the winding hills in a faint mist. I slipped on my beige sweater, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and drove down into town. It was meant to be a simple errand, to buy some tea and ingredients for dinner. But perhaps fate had arranged for that ordinary trip to become the quiet closing of my past. Hill's Grocery, the little store on the corner, sat between two old maple trees whose golden leaves blanketed the sidewalk. It was the same place I stopped by every week. Each time I opened the door, the wind chime above it would sing, a small familiar sound that always made me smile. Today was no different. The air smelled of freshly roasted coffee and warm waffles. I pulled a basket along, listening to the soft creak of the wooden floor beneath my shoes. I wandered through the aisles: produce, grains, fruit. At the very back stood a row of flower buckets, each holding neat bouquets in cool water. The gentle scent of lavender filled the corner, soft and calming. I reached out to choose a bunch, and then heard a voice behind me. Low, husky, familiar enough to make my heart falter for half a beat. "Grace?" I froze. For a moment, time stopped. I turned around, and there he was. Ethan. He stood a few steps away, a paper bag in his hand, his shoulders slightly hunched. His hair had grayed more than I remembered. Lines traced the corners of his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled, the buttons misaligned. In the pale afternoon light, I saw clearly what I hadn't been able to before. The man who once stood on stages with a confident smile was now simply quiet, smaller, humbler, and fragile, in a way that almost felt human. "Hello, Ethan," I said softly, like a breeze passing through. He gave a faint, awkward smile as if unsure where to begin. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I replied, glancing at my basket. "Maple Creek is small, after all." Silence stretched between us. No urgency, no bitterness, just stillness. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed, a cartwheel rolled past, and underneath it all, I could hear the rhythm of my own heart. Steady, calm. Ethan looked at me, his eyes a mix of confusion and sorrow. "You look different, Grace. Better, I hope." "Different. Peaceful," he said quietly. I nodded and smiled faintly. Peaceful. That's the word I'd been searching for. He swallowed, the movement slow, hesitant, as though words were stones he had to lift one by one. "I heard about your speech last week," he said after a pause. "They said the whole room stood up and applauded." I smiled lightly. "I didn't say anything extraordinary. I just talked about forgiveness." Ethan exhaled, his eyes drifting away, the light glinting off a face lined with exhaustion. "Grace," he murmured. "It's taken me a long time to understand that what I called love wasn't love at all. It was fear. Fear of being left behind. I was selfish." I looked at him. Once those words would have made me cry. Now my heart didn't twist anymore. Instead, it felt as though a door, one that had stood open for far too long, was quietly closing. I know, I said gently, and you don't need to apologize. He blinked, startled. Don't need to. I forgave you, Ethan. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry you with me one more day. His eyes flickered, his hand tightening around the paper bag until it crumpled. You really forgave me? Yes, I said calmly. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means I no longer let the past define me. A single tear slipped down his cheek. Quiet, weary. I thought you'd hate me forever. I did, I said, smiling softly, until I realized that hatred is another way of holding on, and I was too tired to carry someone who no longer belonged to me. Ethan lowered his head. His shoulders trembled slightly, maybe from relief, maybe from surrender. And in that moment, I knew he understood. I had gone far beyond him, not by distance, but by peace. Are you happy, Grace? He asked, his voice rough. I don't know what happiness looks like, I said, glancing at the lavender in my hand. But I know I'm at peace, and that's enough. Another silence settled between us. The warm yellow light, the rows of bright products, the soft patter of rain outside. Everything was the same, yet we were strangers now. I placed the bouquet into my basket and nodded. Take care, Ethan. He whispered. You too, Grace. I walked toward the door, and when the chime above it rang softly, I knew that was the sound of a chapter closing. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was washed in pale amber. I stood beneath the awning, watching droplets slide from the leaves, one by one, to the stone path below. The smell of wet earth mingled with the lavender in my bag. Clean, tender, light. I opened the car door, set the flowers on the seat beside me. The fading sunlight streamed through the windshield, glinting off the violet petals. I touched them gently and smiled, the smile of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. On the drive home, the radio played an old jazz tune, one Ethan used to love. Once, that melody had made me cry. Today, I simply listened and let it pass, like a breeze, touching, but no longer wounding. As I turned onto the road leading home, I saw my father in the yard watering plants, and my mother placing an apple pie on the windowsill. The late sunlight caught their silver hair, and it was beautiful, heartbreakingly so. I stepped out and wrapped my arms around my mother. Mom, I said softly, I saw Ethan today. She looked at me, asked nothing, only placed a hand on my cheek and stroked it gently. And you're all right, aren't you? I nodded. More than ever. My father chuckled, his voice low and warm. Then you've won, Grace. Not against someone else, but against yourself. I sat down, taking in the small kitchen around me, the golden light, the scent of apple pie, cinnamon, and lavender from the bouquet I'd brought home. I opened my notebook and wrote, Today, I met the man who once broke me, but this time my heart didn't tremble. Because I finally understand, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the purest form of courage. I set the pen down and looked out the window. The sky was painted in indigo and violet, a few birds gliding home. I exhaled softly. Peace, I realized, isn't something we search for. It's something we become. This morning, I woke before dawn. A pale gray light was just beginning to filter through the window, and a thin mist clung to the edges of the glass. Outside, sparrows fluttered against the eaves, their wings whispering softly. I poured myself a cup of ginger tea. The warm, spicy scent filled the kitchen. On the table lay the bundle of dried lavender I'd left out all week. Its purple faded now, but the fragrance still rich. I tied a small beige ribbon around it. Neat, simple, like a private ritual for things that have reached their quiet end. I gazed at the bouquet for a long while. Like me, it had weathered sun and wind, dry now, yet still fragrant. I smiled, placed it on the passenger seat, and started the car. The road from Maple Creek to San Francisco stretched between rows of maples just beginning to turn. The soft light of early autumn slanted through the leaves, scattering gold across the asphalt. I turned on the radio, gentle classical guitar, no words, only the story told through strings and silence. Tires rolled over a damp pavement. I felt no tightness in my chest, no nervousness like a year ago, no fear of what I might see, no longing for what once was. I was simply passing through, like a traveler returning to an old house, not to stay, but to say, "I'm all right now." The city appeared after a bend in the road, its towers glinting in the morning light. San Francisco, still dazzling, still distant, still beautiful. Every street, every reflection, every shadow across the sidewalk, all familiar yet stripped of power over me. I stopped at the parking lot beside the glass tower, the building I had once entered each day in immaculate dresses, wearing a perfect smile and a hollow heart. I stayed in the car, my hand resting lightly on the wheel. I didn't go inside. I didn't even look around. I just looked straight ahead, at the reflection of the sky in the mirrored facade. That building had once been everything I thought I wanted. Success, prestige, validation. Now it was only a gleaming shell, empty and cold. I took a deep breath. And in that moment, I understood. Peace doesn't come from forgetting, but from remembering, without pain. I left the lot and drove slowly through the streets of my old life. Then I turned onto the hill that led to the house. That house, the stage where I had played every role: dutiful wife, capable woman, perfect partner. The iron gate had been repainted. The shadows that once haunted it were gone. Through the window, I saw the white curtain fluttering, a kitchen light glowing softly. Someone else lived there now. A new life, a new story. I parked across the street and rolled down the window. The scent of roses from the garden drifted on the breeze. Wind ran through my hair, carrying a trace of memory with it. I thought I might cry, but the tears never came. Instead, there was a quiet emptiness, warm, gentle, like a wound finally healed. I looked at the house for a long time, then smiled. There was nothing left to say. No goodbyes, no apologies, no grand conclusion. Sometimes silence is the most beautiful farewell. I brushed my fingers across the lavender on my lap. Its scent filled the car, carrying me through the year behind me. The early days in the garden, my palms blistered but my heart light. The afternoon my father taught me forgiveness. My mother's kind eyes, her steady smile, her embrace. The morning I stood before hundreds of women and told my story with a calm voice and dry eyes. I realized then, every pain had once served a purpose. All of it had brought me here, to this moment of freedom. I started the engine and drove on. Leaves crunched softly beneath the tires. In the rearview mirror, the old house grew smaller, blurred, then vanished behind the hill. I didn't look back. The chapter was finished. It didn't need rewriting. I drove toward the sea. The wind grew stronger as I neared the coast. The sky stretched wide and blue, washed clean by the night's rain. I stopped at a lookout point where the entire bay opened before me. The water was calm, sunlight rippling across its surface in soft golden threads. I rolled down the windows, letting the ocean air fill the car, letting the sound of waves whisper around me. No ceremony, no prayer. I just wanted to sit and know that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I held the lavender in my hands, turned it gently in the light. Each dried petal shimmered faintly, pale violet against the sun. That scent, once a symbol of peace I sought, now lived within me. I closed my eyes, In my mind, I saw a wide lavender field under a blue sky. The wind was soft. My parents stood in the distance and smiling. Ethan was there too, not approaching, just nodding once, quietly. No anger, no sorrow, only souls that had learned to let go. When I opened my eyes, tears were already on my cheeks. Not of sadness, but gratitude. I wiped them away, took a long breath, and turned up the radio. A familiar tune began. Moon River. It flowed like water, neither happy nor sad, simply true. On the drive back to Maple Creek, the light of dusk spilled over the hills. I stopped at a roadside cafe and bought a cup of lemon tea. The elderly woman behind the counter squinted at me. "Long trip, dear?" I nodded, smiling. "Just heading home, finally." She chuckled softly. "Good. A person's only truly strong when they know how to return." By the time I reached my little house, the last sunlight glowed along the roof. I opened the door and placed the lavender bouquet in the ceramic vase on the table. The scent spread through the room, mingling with the aroma of the apple pie my mother had left that morning. I turned on the lamp. Warm yellow light wrapped around the walls like a gentle sigh. I sat down, opened my old journal, and wrote. Today, I went back to the past and found nothing there. No anger, no regret, no fear. Only sunlight, wind, and a heart light as breath. Perhaps this is what peace truly means. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. A flock of sparrows perched on the wire, their tiny songs threading through the still air. I touched the vase, letting the lavender's fragrance slip through my fingers, soft, calm, like a final whisper from a life already lived. "You survived, Grace." I smiled. The curtains stirred as a breeze passed through, and the sunset tilted across the wall like a painting. I turned off the radio and sank into the chair by the window. Nothing more was needed. A chapter had closed, without thunder, without tears. Just a woman stepping through her doorway, setting flowers in a vase, writing a few lines, and smiling. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply walks away, carrying peace, knowing the greatest victory is learning how to let go. In the end, Grace didn't seek revenge through bitterness. She did it by living so well that the past could no longer reach her. Perhaps that is the most beautiful form of revenge, when the one who once hurt you is forced to watch you find peace, smile, and walk away without a sound. Because sometimes, the truest strength isn't in rising after pain, but in being able to smile at the very wound that once broke you. And what about you? If you've ever had to let go of someone, a dream, or even a part of yourself, do you think forgiveness can also be a gentle kind of revenge? Tell me your story below. Maybe, among all our broken pieces, we'll find a little light for one another.